thanks to everybody joining us online. We're just kicking off. I'd like to acknowledge the Kabi Kabi people, the Aboriginal owners of the land where we gather today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I recognise their connection to country and their role in caring for and maintaining country over thousands of years. May their strength and wisdom be with us today. Why are we here today? Why should university researchers be engaging with the media? 1, amplified visibility. Engaging with the media can extend your reach beyond academia and boost awareness of your research and its impact. Increased credibility. Media coverage can establish you as an expert in your field, leading to more invitations for speaking engagements, collaborations, and events. Increased funding potential. Media exposure can showcase your research to potential funders, more opportunities, sharpen your communication skills. It can hone your ability to communicate complex concepts in simple terms for an everyday audience and transform your research into action. Engaging with the media can translate your research findings into actionable insights for policymakers, industry professionals, and the wider community. Our inaugural masterclass will feature 3 exceptional speakers. We have 2 in the room today. And we've got Linda joining us online to present. These exceptional speakers will provide insights and strategies on how to elevate your academic credibility and expertise through media engagement. First up is Linda Byford, the Director of News and Partnerships at the Australian Science Media Centre. With a background in biotechnology and science communication, Linda manages a team that helps mainstream journalists cover some of the biggest stories in the news. She's a frequent commentator on science media relations and regularly appears on the AVC. Our second speaker is Claire McKay from UniSC Marketing and Communications team. She'll provide insight into the process of what happens when a research expert is contacted for an interview or comment in the media. Claire will offer tips and talk about the support and research resources the marketing and comms team can offer. Finally, we have Professor Patrick Nunn, a geography professor here at UniSC with more than 20 years experience teaching and researching at the University of the South Pacific. Professor Patrick will share his personal experiences and journey of being an expert in the media, the advantages, disadvantages, tips, and traps for young players. Professor Nunn has an interest in traditional local knowledge, Pacific geological histories, and cultural worldviews, as well as the effects of sea level change on landscape evolution. Together, these 3 speakers bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to our masterclass and will provide practical tips and strategies so that you can navigate media interactions with confidence and ease. Thanks so much. Let's welcome Linda.
That look good?
Yeah, it does.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm joining you from the beautiful Ghana lands here in Adelaide, and I also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today, Indigenous people anywhere, and pay my respects to the land on which I'm presenting from and to elders past, present and emerging. So you may not know the Australian Science Media Centre because we're a little bit of a sort of hidden organisation that works in the background, but our main role is really to inject evidence and experts into science in the headlines. So we work a lot around sort of big breaking news stories, but we also work to promote Australian research into the news here in Australia, in New Zealand, and also across the Pacific. So we work with about 1,700 journalists. We work on over 3,000 science stories every year. We've got a database of around 6,000 experts, and on an average year, we touch around 40,000 different news stories. One of the things we do is called an expert reaction, which we often do to breaking news or controversial research. And that's really a way of kind of injecting expert quotes and comments. It's sort of a collection of expert quotes and comments that we send out to journalists as a story is breaking or while a piece of research is being written about by those journalists so that they can easily access the best experts on that topic. We also operate a website called CIMEX, which you might be familiar with, might not. And this is kind of a one-stop shop for journalists looking for a science story. So universities and research organizations like USC can upload their press releases onto this site. We also include stories from all the major scientific journals. So journalists, whether you're a sort of local radio journalist or the science journalist from The Age, you can come to this site and find a science story that's going to interest you. So in terms of how you guys can engage with the media, I thought it's really worth thinking about what the media wants. And the first thing to think about is, what is the purpose of news? Now, you might think it's sort of to educate us or to inform us, but actually the main purpose of news is to entertain us. It is a competition for our eyeballs. News outlets want to keep us looking at their content and reading their stories and watching their stories for as long as possible. A lot of news organizations are commercial, and it is that commercial imperative sort of driving them to keep us on their news site so they can sell advertising around that story and keep themselves going. So as much as it is to inform, it's also to entertain. But that doesn't mean you can't do both. So the best entertainment is something that teaches you something, and the best information is something that's presented in an entertaining way. So we've got to kind of do both when it comes to talking to the news. And just to highlight that, this is a tweet from a journalist who worked at news.com.au. And I think it really highlights the sort of pressure that journalists are under. So he's essentially saying a story has a half-life of about 16 hours. So news outlets have to get the bulk of their audience, will get the bulk of their audience to that story in the first 16 hours. So there's really this huge pressure to have stories that grabs people's attention sort of straight away and pull you into that story, because by the next day, nobody's going to be interested in reading it. So time is a huge pressure on the media. And that's really why they structure their stories the way that they do, and why it's so different to science. So when we think about the way that a science paper might be written, for example, you have this introduction that sort of brings you into the state of play at the moment and where the science is. You might have a materials and methods section that sort of describes in detail what was done and the very detailed results. There might be a discussion that plays out how those results have implications in the bigger world. And sometimes in a paper, right at the very end, there's this conclusion that says, in summary, we did this and discovered that. When that's presented in the news, that entire thing will be flipped on its head. So the news will start with the main conclusion right at the top. They want to say, you know, scientists have discovered that, you know, this frog that we thought was extinct is not extinct anymore, or whatever the finding actually is, has to go up the top. Then they might have a, you know, answer to these sorts of questions aside of what was found, when was it found, where was it found, how was it found, who found it, who's it going to, you know, impact, those sorts of questions. They might put some important facts, and then at the end, if there's space, they'll include a bit of that broader background information. And the reason that they do that, it really harks back to kind of old newspaper days where we have these jobs called sub-editors, and their job is to fit everything in the newspapers. They usually work late at night, often after the journalists who've written the stories have gone home. And if the journalist thought she had room for, say, a 500-word story, the sub-editor might come along and say, no, we've only got room for a 200-word story now. And so the sub-editor will literally just chop that story in half. So they have to make sure that it still makes sense if you lose those last 10 paragraphs, say. So they really have to make sure the main points of the story are up the front. Now that still translates to the online world, because we know people don't read anything in completion online. Most people get through about halfway through a story and then they'll jump off. So again, we need to make sure we have all those main findings up the top. And if you keep that in mind when you're talking to a news journalist, that's the way they're going to think. So if you can kind of jump straight out with, here's what we found, here's why it's exciting, and here's why it matters, that's the best way to engage a journalist in your work. And it's worth thinking about the science literacy of the people who are reading news. You know, most of us who work in science, you know, we have this assumption that everybody almost knows as much as we do about topics, or you forget how little other people might know about your topic. And this is particularly true when it comes to jargon and academic language. So I've just put this here. This was a survey done by STA a few years ago now, but they found that 27% of Australians still think that dinosaurs and humans coexisted. So it's worth sort of keeping those things in the back of your mind, that you know, science literacy isn't necessarily broad across the Australian population. And we really need to keep our science quite simple when we're talking to the media and talking to the public. So I thought I would talk a little bit about jargon, because it's definitely something that's worth keeping in mind when you're communicating with the media. So I've just put this image here from a site called Sharing Science, that it just highlights that what scientists might think of a specific term is not necessarily what the public thinks of a specific term. So you might talk about dating an artifact or dating a site, but what the public thinks about is completely different. They think about going on a date when you use a term like that. But a lot of jargon is really just habit. So if you think about the words that you might use in a scientific paper, a lot of them are kind of unnecessarily complex. And when we're talking to the media or talking to the public, you really need to simplify the language you're using, you know, to the kind of language you might use when you were talking to your grandparents or a neighbor or a taxi driver, you know, really trying to get rid of all of that academic language rather than the specific jargon. So instead of saying utilize, you might just go with use. And approximately is about. Generate could be to make. If you want to say we hypothesize that this was going to happen, you can just say we think that this is what's going to happen. So none of these are specific terms to an area of the science, but they're all things that we kind of see played out in scientific writing all the time. And they're the sorts of words that we really need to eliminate when we're talking to journalists. And why it matters is when you put all of that academic language together, you get sentences that are actually quite difficult to read. So here's a little sentence that uses a lot of these words. Utilizing a novel technique, it was ascertained that an anomalous discrepancy observed in approximately 16.3 per thousand indices was generated by a transient phenomenon. And that's not the sort of sentence I can read in a newspaper. It's immediately difficult to understand. I might have to think, gosh, what does the word ascertained mean again? And while I probably do know it, it's not something that I use every day. So I do have to kind of stop and think about what that means. And the minute someone has to stop and think about what that word means, that's an opportunity for them to stop reading that news story. And that's why we really need to keep that language easy to understand, because the best way to sound smart is to make your audience feel smart. And that means making those people that read those newspapers feel like they understand and can engage with your science. If you're not sure how your writing is and whether people can understand it, this is actually from a simple website called scienceandpublic.com, which anyone can use. It's free to use, and it will give you a readability score for your science. And so you can always plug that in and check it in there. So this is a new version of that exact same sentence using simpler language. Our new approach showed that in one case in 60, there was an unexpected difference that was caused by a short-term effect. Much easier to understand what that person is getting at. A couple of other things that you can do to improve your engagement with news media, or the likelihood that they will want to use your comments or speak to you about your story, is to use analogy and imagery. This is a lovely quote from Matt Taylor from the European Space Agency, and it was about landing a probe on a comet a long way away. It's a beautiful quote, like shooting a bullet at a bullet while riding a horse blindfolded. It doesn't tell me any of the detail about what they did to get this probe there, but it really gives me that immediate picture in my mind that this was a really difficult thing they've had to do. Again, if you struggle to come up with metaphors for your science or ways to describe these complicated processes that other people will understand, there's a great cheat website called MetaMia, where you can actually put in your subject area or the word that you're trying to find an analogy or a metaphor for, and it will spit out a whole bunch that other people have previously come across. So you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And when you're talking to journalists about the numbers in your research, we really don't need a high level of accuracy. So you can absolutely ballpark big numbers. So, you know, we don't need findings down to the second decimal place. It's absolutely fine to round things up to whole numbers. And it's also worth keeping in mind that for most of us, it's really hard to picture what percentages look like. So saying, for example, 20% of people will get cancer in their lifetime, that's really hard for me to imagine what 20% of people looks like. It's much better to say 1 in 5 people will get cancer in their lifetime, because I might have 5 people in my family and I can picture what 1 in 5 looks like. So the way that we present numbers can have a big difference on the way how engaging that work is. And similarly, you know, talking about big numbers as, you know, the number of football fields, or that's 15 buses long or something like that, it is also a really great way of making those numbers relatable to people, because it has to be in comparison to something that they're aware of the size of. Images are really important in news. Ideally, they should be vivid and dramatic. So this is the Large Hadron Collider. It's a pretty impressive image. I don't expect everybody will have a brilliant image like that for their research, but this is another example that was sent out with a Nature press release. I think it was about butterflies. They sent out this image kind of the scientist in the field capturing the image. It's not the most exciting image in the world, but a news outlet might use it to show that this is where, you know, it gives kind of a place setting for where that research was done. But it also came with this amazing image, which is much more vivid and dramatic, and it really shows the species that they're researching, and is really eye-catching. So they're much more likely to use an image like that than they are to use an image like that. So think about the images, get up close if that will help, get further away if that will help, but really a nice variety of images with your press release or with your story is really, really useful for news media. And I guess the reason is because these days, most of us aren't reading newspapers or listening to the radio. The main sources of TV news, no matter which generation you're looking at, is something that requires pictures. So on TV, they're obviously needing images. And so for the baby boomers and the over 70s sort of generation, TV is still the biggest source of news for them. And even in the Generation X, which is me, still like our TV news. If you want to talk to younger generations, then you're talking more about stories that are shared on social media or online news, and those also require images and video to capture people's attention. So, you know, just having a story without a picture to go with it, it will not get anywhere near the amount of coverage as it would if you've got a great picture. I'm not sure we have, I'll play you this video because I just think it's a perfect example of the kind of video that scientists and experts can capture out in the field that is impossible for a news organization to capture, but it's incredibly useful for a news outlet that might be reporting this story. Now, they don't need the beautiful titles across it. They don't need the music. They just need that raw footage.
My God, it looks like an iron meteorite, guys. How does it feel to find your first CFN meteorite? Absolutely.
Okay, so I think for you guys, especially if you're doing work out in the Pacific, you're probably going to fairly remote locations that journalists are not going to be able to, you know, follow you to. So if you can capture any of that footage, all of this was captured on mobile phones and GoPros. There was nothing, there was no expensive video equipment. You can see it's a little bit shaky, it's not perfectly captured, but what it perfectly captures is that moment of discovery, the enthusiasm, the real reality of doing that science out in the field, and that is invaluable to media. So if you can just grab your mobile phone and take some footage of where you are, that's incredibly useful. When it comes to an interview with journalists, it's worth thinking about a couple of things in advance. Preparation in advance of an interview is the key to an interview going well. If you just rock up to an interview without thinking about what you want to say and what story you want to tell, it will probably go very badly. So the first question to think about is who is the audience? You know, what is the journalist, what program is the journalist from? Have I seen that program before? If you haven't, it's worth sitting down and watching an episode or reading some stories on that outlet to sort of see the types of stories that they run, because a story that runs on the AM program on the ABC, for example, is going to be completely different to a story that runs on the project, which is much more jokey and lighthearted generally. So think about your audience. And then these are some really good questions to kind of ask yourself. So what is the problem or issue that I'm trying to solve? Probably the main question is the so what factor, which is why should the public care? So it might be that this problem costs them money in the health budget every year. So, you know, we need to solve this to save them money. It might be because people are dying and they might know somebody who might get this disease, you know, or it could be that this is just one of those things that makes us go, wow, that is really cool. Aren't humans amazing? So it needs to have some sort of so what factor. What does this mean for me, my friends, people I might know? And then we have the solutions. So what are you doing? What's your research actually doing to solve this problem? And what are the potential benefits for the public or your audience at the end of the day? So there are some kind of key questions you can use. And from there, you really need to kind of pull out 3 key messages for an interview. And the reason we say 3 is because for most of us, that's all we can remember. And we don't want to be reading from scripts in any kind of interview. So if you can write down 3 key messages that you want to get across when you're talking to a journalist, and then keep them in your mind. You can stick them on a post-it note if you're doing a radio interview and have them on your computer screen in front of you. Anything like that to help you remember your 3 key messages. And then that will help you kind of come back to what you want to get across in an interview and tell your story. And please leave things out. It's often the materials and methods section that you want to leave out, because for most people, how you did the research is not as important as what you found. So don't get too bogged down with explaining the process of what you did. It's far better to focus on the end result. And generally, a journalist will ask you these sorts of questions, the what, when, where, who, why, how questions. So what did you do? When is it going to be available, or when can we see the benefit? Where, who is this going to affect? Where did you do it? Why did you do it? And a bit of how did you do it? And have answers to those questions ready, because they will usually be the sort of short grabs that they will use in a TV interview, for example. And I've said, remember the intelligent 10-year-old. That's not to say that when you talk to the media, you need to kind of talk to people as if they're children, because that's definitely not what I mean. You know, these are intelligent people. Journalists are really smart, but they generally don't have a background in the area that you're working in, and neither does their audience. So again, it's about keeping the language that you're using simple and relating it back to things that people might understand in their everyday lives. And remember the rules of a media interview. So the media's job is to get a story. It's not necessarily to tell your story, but that's your job, to tell your story your way. So you don't necessarily have to answer the question that you're asked. You know, it's absolutely fine to say, actually, that's not really what my research looks at, but what I can tell you is, and kind of go back to those main 3 points that you want to make. So keep that in mind. It's your job to tell your story. It's not the journalist's job to get that from you. And finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about dumbing it down, because I know it's something that, you know, can be a bit sensitive for people. And I thought I would give this example of a great way that complicated, you know, difficult concepts can be explained using kind of everyday things that might appeal to people, because we're not talking about dumbing it down. We're talking about making your science or your research engaging for an audience, so that they can get to that, now I see why it's interesting kind of moment. And so this was a story in news.com.au, and it was on their homepage. This is the biggest news website in Australia. And the story was how Kit Kats have embarrassed Australia. And I mean, who doesn't want to read a story about Kit Kats? So they've used chocolate as a sort of universal thing to bring people into the story. But what the story was actually about was climate change. And it was about how the company who made Kit Kats had committed to net zero by 2050. And at the time, Australia still hadn't committed to that. So it was a kind of interesting way to frame a story about climate change that pulled people in. If they had just put a story on their homepage that said, you know, Australia doesn't have a climate net zero by 50-50 policy, it would have got, you know, hardly any clicks. Nobody would have read the story. But instead, they've used a kind of interesting angle where people are going to read about it. And it's that kind of education by stealth. We're making it entertaining, but we're still, at the end of the day, giving them some information about something that is important. I have been racing through this today because I know we've got 3 speakers, so apologies if I've been going too long, but if you would like some more tips on how to talk to the media or journalists, we have a website called Science Media Savvy. that you can access. It's got lots of interviews with journalists and interviews with scientists talking about lessons they've learned and tips they have. It's got tip sheets for dealing with the media and social media and even talking about contentious science. So that's Science Media Savvy. If you would like to engage with the media more, a really good way to do that is to develop a profile on our website, CIMEX. So CIMEX has this Find an Expert section for journalists. And we have profiles of scientists. So you can, as long as you are, I think, third-year PhD or higher, you can develop a profile on CIMEX. You can put your expertise, you can say what you're comfortable with. So Gretchen, for example, is quite happy to do live TV, radio, print, pre-recorded. You can put your Twitter account on there and it will pull in your Twitter feeds. So journalists can kind of instantly see that you are engaged with what's going on in the news at the moment. And all of those contact details that are there are actually only visible to journalists who log in, so the public can't see them. So really encourage you to sign up to that website. And I should say we're also, oh, hang on, let me go back. We're also currently really trying to get experts who are based in the Pacific to sign up as well. So we've been working with the ABC's International Development Team to try and get both more journalists in the Pacific, but more experts in the Pacific as well. So this is my colleague Itu at the back there, who has just been to Fiji, meeting lots of experts and journalists and signing them up to CIMEX as well. And if when you sign up to CIMEX, there's also the ability to tick whether you're Indigenous Torres Strait or have Pacific Island ancestry, because we're really trying to improve the visibility of First Nations experts on CIMEX as well. So there's those two websites I mentioned. It's cimex.org/expert to sign up. Or if you want some more tips, it's sciencemediasavvy.org. That's it from me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Linda. That was very insightful. I really appreciated, those tips on distilling your audience, as well as that nice matrix for prepping for an interview. I do like that so what consideration. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. That was wonderful.
No problems.
Let's introduce Claire McKay from UniSC's Marketing and Communications. She's going to be our next presenter.
Thank you. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk today, to talk about what the media team does and why we do it and how we can help you tell your stories, share your success stories, talk about your research, talk about your projects and get it out there, like nationally, globally. That's what we're here for. So we've talked about, Lyndall's covered basically why making impact through media is important, but for the university also, it's a strategic focus of our team to build and protect the university's reputation and help improve our rankings through our media by promoting our research, our teaching, our engagement. And all that contributes, of course, to what our bread and butter is all about, is getting students to come to UniSC. I'll just do it with this name. Okay, so the media team, what do we do? Well, we're all former journalists with experience across a range of media outlets and backgrounds, including TV, radio, ABC, PR, print. And we have 5 members basically to prioritise potential stories related to 120 degrees, about 1,000 staff, 18,000 students, 30,000 graduates, and a dozen of research areas, centres and partners. So we've got a lot to cover. So as you can imagine, it's competitive to get your story to be covered by our team. Every day is proactive and reactive. We're responding to internal and external requests and issues and preparing media releases to generate coverage. We interview, we write, we research, we photograph, we film UniSC people doing their research activities for packages. We pitch them, we liaise with media outlets and story subjects to arrange follow-up interviews. We monitor media coverage, we provide media advice and training. We share content with the wider marketing communications team for repurposing. A lot of what we gather is then repurposed. That content's regathered for social media, for student recruitment, for a number of purposes. The team also keeps across the news agenda and industry changes and often pivot quickly to adapt to this to get our best chances of being republished, broadcast or posted or shared. We're also responsible for critical incident reporting. So we really are your first port of call if you have a story idea, if you have an exciting research project, if you have an exciting initiative happening. So contact us, suggest your story. If you've got some research that's about to be published in a journal, please let us know. Advise the team and receive assistance if you're contacted by a journalist for an interview. You can come to us, let us know, and then we can help you with that process with advice, with some tips, techniques for doing those interviews. You can request a summary of the daily news reports. You can, as I said, we can seek media training. We can offer that to you, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. And discuss other engagement and partnership opportunities that we have, such as the Australian Science Media Centre, and that we have also with The Conversation. Now, the team may also contact you to provide expert commentary. And this is an important part of what we do. We receive a lot of requests from media asking, do you have someone to talk about a particular issue? So if we know that you're the person for that job, we'll contact you and put you before the media, and we'll help you with that. So please, if you get that opportunity, do think about taking advantage of that. Now, all our latest news releases can be found on our website under the news, on the news page, and any inquiries, the best place is basically media@USC. If you send something there, we can help you. So we've covered a bit about what makes news by Lyndall's great presentation. And as she said, media is competitive, the landscape's competitive, it's changing all the time, and there's an increasing focus on digital and visual communication. So as Lyndall said, it has to be engaging, it has to be informative, and it has to be entertaining. Now, within UniSC, there are so many wonderful research projects going on, initiatives that are worthy of being covered, but unfortunately, it's impossible for the media team to cover them all. So the selection comes down to basically what we consider is most likely to attract great media attention. So the Pacific Islands and our relationship with our regional neighbours is definitely in the news at the moment. One of the main budget announcements was a commitment of a transformative package by the Albanese government and a commitment to developing a peaceful, resilient Pacific region. So that's so much about what you're doing. So it's in the news at the moment. So essentially, if a research project or a study or a centre initiative, event or profile has potential to become a news story, we'll look at it for its newsworthiness. So is it likely to attract a lot of interest from people outside UniSC? So is it a topic on the current news agenda? Do we own it? Let's own it. How much of it is a UniSC project compared to external partners, other organisations, funding body? Are we the lead organisation? So that's quite important. If we are the lead organisation, we will definitely, and that definitely puts it to the top of the list for whether we can consider covering it. Is it right on time? Is it happening now? Is it happening soon? So is there an upcoming research publication date or a new angle or opinion or topic in the news that we can cover? Are you in the right place at the right time? So is your story a geographic or cultural fit with a particular media audience? Is it relevant to our markets in Fraser Coast, Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast, North Brisbane? And it's a case of, well, I never. Is it unexpected or odd, rare, surprising? Does it have star quality? So does it involve well-known people or places or institutions? Is it the biggest? Is it the largest? Is it the best? Does it impact a lot of people? And is there a human interest, human element to it? Is it positive? Is it a scientific breakthrough that's going to benefit a lot of people? Is it a feel-good story? Is it going to trigger emotions? And importantly, is it visual? We've just heard from Lyndall about the importance of vision images. So they can be the key to gaining media coverage. And so gathering images and vision is really, really important. And as Lyndall said, you go out in the field, you go to different places in the Pacific, like you can't have a media team with you, you can't have someone from our team with you. So really important where you can to take photos, to take vision. For social media and even for the media now, it's quite relaxed on what they'll publish. So shoot in landscape, but just shoot everything. And the more you can get, the better. So always think visually when you're out in the field, when you're doing having a meeting with someone, you're having a conference or whatever, think visually. Try and make those photos as engaging as possible because that gives more chance of success in getting coverage. Importantly, when you are taking photos of people, and if you're in the Pacific region, always think permissions too, because that's really important to get the permission of people for their photo to be taken and then to be repurposed. So please remember that. So let's break it down with just a few examples of what's been working. Okay, but first of all, sorry, a different slide. I wanted to start with one of our biggest success stories possibly for UniSC research so far. And that's Sam Phillips and Peter Tim's story on the koala chlamydia vaccine for wild koala populations. Now, this story has just gone global. At our last count, it had a reach of 1.2 billion. So it's been covered in the last few days in the Washington Post, Smithsonian Magazine, the Daily Mail, Fox News, Huffington Post, Yahoo, you name it. It is just amazing. Amazing coverage promotion for UniSC. So if you fancy a challenge, that's the story now to beat. So another one, interesting one, is the well I never category, I guess, and we all know sex sells. And so this story is about a quoll species that's killing themselves because they're having too much, they're foregoing sleep to have too much sex, basically. They're favouring sex over sleep. So we knew it would be a winner, but we took two approaches to gain maximum coverage for this. So we did a media release and it was written and sent out to our contacts, which is about around, say 300 or so, and then specialist media. But we also uploaded the story into the Australian Science Media Centre, as you've just heard from Lyndall. Now, this is a great way to get your research stories out there, and we had an amazing response. So in 24 hours, the coverage included BBC, NBC, Sydney Morning Herald, Herald Sun, ABC Online, The Guardian, multiple ABC radio stations, and then it went global. So we had international clips, CNN's, CBS radio, and so on and so on. So if you want to have an example of the benefit of the Australian Science Media Centre and getting your stories on SkyMex, this is definitely a great example of that. Sorry, there's that story. And now human interest we spoke about, personalising things. Now this is a story of a 73-year-old great-grandmother, Sharon Sutton, who had to leave school at when she was 12 because she had to go to work for her family. And she finally achieved her lifelong ambition of gaining a degree. Now, again, she became a media sensation with that story and has had coverage all over Australia, TV, radio, national publications. So where you can personalise a story, think about that. If you have a great research story and you've got a really good way to personalise it, do it, because that is one way to entertain and engage people and capture media interest. So yeah, so think about a case study, think about having a person tell how your research has impacted on their lives. And if you can do that, that's fantastic. So another story, part of the global efforts to tackle obesity in Pacific Islands. So then when we're talking about having impact and being in the right place, that's the geographical reach of what you're doing. And also when we're talking about, is there a topic dominating the news? The perfect time to offer expert commentary. In this case, we had Patrick offering his expertise to when the world's biggest volcano erupted in Hawaii. We put out a media alert saying we have an expert in this field. Patrick Nunn is available to comment, And so it's about being there off when something's timely, be there and be able to react quickly to that. So we do often put out an experts list when something's happening, say in the budget, or various points over summer or whatever. So if you're contacted and have the opportunity to go into our experts list, we send that out to media saying these are our experts available to talk about this particular topic. Please do. And think about it. If something happens in the news, it's within your area of expertise, get in touch and let us know. And we can put out a media alert to let the media know that we have someone who can talk about this. And you also heard about the Australian Science Media Centre do their call for experts. Please take up that opportunity. Often it's a very quick turnaround, but you can gain national exposure with just providing a comment of about 200 words. It's a fantastic opportunity. So before you decide you want to do a media story, so you've got a fantastic research paper, an exciting project, and you really want to share it, you need to ask yourself some questions. You need to be clear about why you want it. So is it in response to breaking news, a topic of current interest, a future event, or a general explainer about your project or research? Are you trying to position yourself as someone who's an expert on a topic? Can you inform public opinion in this area? Are you going to help raise the reputation of UniSC by what you're doing and promote its teaching and its programs and its research? Who's your intended audience? Now, this is very important. You know, what's the purpose of it? Who are you trying to reach? And what benefits are going to be gained by going to the media? Is there another way to tell your story? A better way to share your success? Because the media, there's no guarantee of coverage and there's no guarantee of how they're going to cover your story. So think about why you're doing it and is there a better way? Sometimes there is. Now, sorry, we've had a bit of a mix up. Everything's out of whack. One important thing is about timing. I'll just see if I've got that. You need to give the media team as much lead-in time as possible when you have research, a project, or story. As we've heard, like with the Australian Science Media Centre, we do the media release, we upload it to the Australian Science Media Centre. Now, there is a lead-up time in that, like these stories require research, we've got to get it right, we've got to, if there's partners involved, we've got to go back for their approvals, you've got to seek higher approvals, you've got to capture vision or images to go with that. So you can't just let us know about a research paper that's about to land, because often with the Australian Science Media Centre, it likes to be timely, and media like to be timely too. Often, like if it's a research paper that's a few days old, often that's it, interest has waned. So it's very important that you let us know early, we can work on it together and we can have it ready to go. If you've got a research paper the day it drops, and then we can put it on the Australian Science Media Centre. We can even put it on the embargo lifting and have that ready to go. And it's a great way to reach media, and it's very important that it's timely. The same is true, and if you're going to share your expertise on a hot topic of the day, it's a 24-hour news cycle. If you don't get in quick, if you don't respond quickly to media requests, well, the moment's often gone and the media will move on. So availability is another important thing. Don't ask for a media story and we'll do one and great, and we get some coverage. But often if then you're not available for an interview, like the momentum's gone, okay? So if we send out a media release, if we do a media pitch, if you're promoted there as an expert, please make sure you do have availability then when the interview requests come in. That's really, really important. And importantly, you've got to be prepared to give your time to work with us and take opportunity to get photos, to get vision, to do all the approval process. So there's quite a lot involved. Now, once you're clear about what you want from your media coverage, you've got to give us your best pitch, basically, because so you're not just pitching to the media because we've got to pitch to the media. We'll help you pitch to the media, but you've got to sell your story to us, and you've got to help us help you too. And so Lyndall touched on it before. We need to know in a really clear, concise way what your story's about, what problem you're solving, and how many people it's going to help. Why does it matter? Why do people know about this? some key points and examples you're going to be using for your argument, and if there's a human element, as we just spoke about, and what visual elements are there. So please keep that in mind because it's really important. If you're also doing research, you need details on ethics approval, confidentiality, commercial and confidence clauses. If it's higher degree by research, we'll need to know what supervisors are involved, any collaborative partners, grants or funding providers, and inspected embargo dates for research publications. We've touched on the challenge of turning complex science or academic studies into simple, compelling reading, and that's so important, and that's what Lyndall spoke about. So it's really important when you're putting together your story, you think that way. Okay, keep it really simple, keep it entertaining, keep it engaging in what you're trying to tell us. Make it easy to understand. So we're going to do a story. So what are your options? So, well, there are many ways to tell and sell a story. And that's our job as a media team, to work with you to determine the best approach for your story to gain maximum coverage. So one of the main things are media releases. So after accepting your pitch, we'll ask you to provide more information. We might do an interview, we'll get quotes, we'll write up the story in new style, and then we will take it back to you, take the draft back to you to review. Once it's signed off, we'll have it approved. If there's other partners involved, we'll seek approvals. And once completed and approved, we then send that media release out to our extensive database of media contacts, and the story gets posted on the web. Now, here's a story. I'm picking on Patrick today. Here's a story that Patrick has done. And so you can see we've done the media release. That's the pitch that went out to the media. And here's the story on our website. We've already touched on the Australian Science Media Centre. So if your story, we post your story up there, we'll also be your main point of contact then if interview requests come through, and we can help you coordinate that. Sometimes stories go crazy. So we had 16 stories. Oh, sorry, it's going to go to Minecraft. Get out of that. Yeah, jump back. Sorry. I was just going to show you some of the stories. We had 16 stories that featured on SkyMex last year. Another great way to get coverage also is through the conversation. Great way to share your expertise and opinion. So we can help you with pitches with this. And if you do make a pitch and get accepted, make sure you let us know too, because we can then promote that story through our media channels as well. Now, the conversation, like SkyMex works, a snapshot of coverage provided during the last year was we gained more than 2.5 million readers worldwide, up 1.2 million from the previous year. And so that was with 36 articles published by 35 academics. So it certainly works. Another way we tell stories is digital storytelling through a platform called Shorthand. Now, this is a really engaging way to tell stories. It's very visual, and it can take complex stories and put them in really simple terms, and it's designed to explain them in a very simple way, highlighting the expertise of our academics across various fields and our local and global impact. They're conversation style content pieces, and they can take a deep dive into an area or an important issue, and it can bring together the viewpoints of a lot of different academics in one article. So this one, hopefully we might be able to just have a quick scan through. As you can see, it's beautiful, it's visual, and it's a great way to tell a story.
So we'll share that link afterwards too. So
Thank you.
Dig the dive.
Another way that we can approach a media story is a direct pitch to media. Now, media love an exclusive, and some stories suit certain media better. So sometimes a direct pitch is the way to go. And we've had recent success with this, with a story from the Seaward Research Group on their seaweed sausage farming. It was offered to the ABC as an exclusive and gained national coverage in 3 different platforms, ABC TV, radio and online. A similar approach was taken by a story that Julie did on Bee Propolis, and that was successfully pitched to Landline, and they came and filmed at our campus in February. So we don't always have to think about a media release and just sending it out globally. Sometimes that direct pitch can get really effective coverage by really quality media outlets. And of course, once you've got content together, other ways to sell it. And so we are developing a new content hub, our marketing communications team, which will be up soon. There's always Facebook, so through our social media team, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, on the website. There's publications, there's some of your work, etc., your students profiled in student recruitment promotions, and YouTube. Again, with that, video is the key. And so the more photos you can provide for social media, as you've seen from Lyndall, it's really, really important. And they don't have to be world-class. They just need to be fun, entertaining, interesting. So just always think visually when you're out there in the field. So what we're trying to do here with our team is to establish our researchers as experts in the field. So we're continuously working to do that nationally, locally, globally. So we've heard about Australian Science Media Centre's expert database. We have a similar one at UniSC. It's linked basically to your staff profile. So, and we are in the process of upgrading this as well, so there'll be more information coming on that. But it's really important that if you can see there, the expert summary. That's what comes up when it says what your expertise is for media, what you're happy to talk to media about. So this is a way where you've really got to pitch yourself to the media. So have a look at what's in yours and see if there's a better way of selling what you do. And also then look at the key search words. So make sure that they do relate to what your area is, and also the keywords that you know are going to get hits if people search. The conversation too, also send out requests daily for experts to talk about certain topics. And so what we need to do as a media team, we need to know what you're doing and who you are. So the more you can tell us about your work and your research, the more we can get your work and research out there in the media. So that's really, really important. So tell us what projects you've got underway. Give us lead up time. Let us know the areas of expertise. We might think you're sort of pigeonholed in this area, but you might be able to talk about a range of issues. So let us know, and then what areas of media you're happy to comment on. You might be happy to do all sorts of interviews with anyone, TV, radio. You might prefer to do written interviews. So just let us know, and do let us know your contact details and mobile. So please, media@USC, just send us your details, send us what you're happy to talk about, and please take a look at your staff profile and see if there's a way that you could improve that. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that we're here to help. We're progressing a number of training events, but in the meantime, if you would like to contact us to say, can you just give me a quick 10-15 minute one-on-one to talk about some interview techniques, some training, some practical tips and guides. How do I craft some key messages? We're happy to do that. We're happy to help with pitches to the conversation. But so send in your pitches, think visually. And now I'm going to hand over to a true master of the media. No, Patrick, he's had great success in promoting his stories because he tells a great story. He makes it engaging. And importantly, he does make himself available to the media. And once you build up a reputation, once they know you're great talent, they'll keep coming back. And so that's really important as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Wonderful. Professor Patrick, can I invite you to come up, please?
Okay, that's wonderful, and I can operate it from here. Okay, well, look, thanks very much, and thanks to Lyndall and Claire for such an illuminating talk. There's lots of things that I've learnt today. Yeah, I won't won't trivialize it by saying what they are. But okay, look, let's get on with this. Otherwise, we'll be here forever. But look, thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. And this is what my research focuses on. And I'm just going to go through this really, really quickly, because this is not really what my talk is about today. But there's several things I focus on: environmental change, particularly in the Pacific, and particularly, like Claire mentioned, volcanism. I just wanted to mention, while I had this slide up on the screen, that there's been a more recent eruption of this last year. And, you know, they have great media in the Pacific. One is the Facebook Live site, Talanoa with Dr. T, and that's run out of Hawaii. And I gave a 1.5 hour session on the Tongan volcanic eruptions and memories of those. And there were 7,400 people not watching, but I mean, who accessed the site within a few days. So there's quite a lot of media in the Pacific that's worth engaging with. When I talk about environmental change, I also talk about climate change and rising sea levels, and the impacts of that on people. A lot of my research has also been with museums in the Pacific, looking at the pre-European history of the Pacific. This is a 3,000-year-old potsherd from Borewa in Fiji with this very interesting turtle motif on it. And that's some of the things that I've been doing. Also, as Melanie Harris knows very well, the hill fort period of Fiji prehistory, which she's climbed at least 2 of these hill forts, Uluina, Vakasinga, and Korolevu here. So she will remember those very, very fondly. But this is again the kind of thing that we've been doing in the Pacific. This from Fiji, from Boer. And then also Pacific people's futures. And then, Claire mentioned the Albanese government aid to the Pacific to build resilience there. A lot of my recent research has actually shown there's a huge amount of resilience in Pacific Island societies that really needs to be harnessed, rather than trying to impose from the outside, Western notions of resilience. And this is a really good example of the Gamali from North Pentecost, these cyclone shelters, which are far better in terms of their design to withstand hurricane force winds than anything else. So understanding Pacific knowledges and capacities. So these are the things that I've been doing recently. What I want to talk about today is what Lyndall and Claire have been talking about. If you have interesting research, who should you talk to, and how do you explain it? And I'll just talk about 3 of my media encounters, and then what I've learned about the media. And of course, I don't mean to be rude to anyone, but I will be frank. So interesting research. Who should you talk to? I think sometimes we are tempted as researchers to shoot too high. We have a sort of an exaggerated sense of how important our research is sometimes. But look, Claire mentioned the conversation. Yes, you need to pitch your research. I'm so pleased that the Media Center here helps develop a pitch, because I've had hardly any success recently. Anyway, enough of that. But look, no, local newspapers, and Lyndall is absolutely right. In Australia, people aren't reading newspapers as much as they used to, but in the Pacific they do. If you want to get your message out in the Pacific, be aware that there's 93,000 copies of the Fiji Times printed every day. And some of these stay in community halls, in rural settings, in villages, for weeks on end, and they're looked at by person after person after person. So, don't underestimate the importance of the print media in the Pacific, and radio as well. A lot of people don't have access to the internet. They don't have televisions, but radio is something that they still value very highly. So if you have research worth talking about, how do you explain it? Well, what I tell a lot of my research students is, when you're writing something, look at the journals or the papers that you are, the newspapers that you're targeting, understand how they write articles, who they're writing them for, and they write them in the same way. Emulate that. It tells you something about the readership. And look, to my mind, a lot of people make a fundamental mistake when they're writing. They write for themselves, and they think, if I can understand it, then anyone can. And I think that whether you're writing a PhD thesis or whether you're writing an article for the Sunshine Coast Daily, it really doesn't matter. Write for your readers, okay? Don't write for yourself. Take your ego, take yourself out of that equation. And I think it's doubly important for the popular media. Think of whom you're writing to. And my goodness, exploit your family and your friends. This is, if you have children in their teens, they are bribable. You can give them money and say, read this, tell me what you understand as a result of this. So it's probably the most important reason to have children, to be honest. No, I want to talk about 3 of my media encounters. This is something that I wrote for the Kaseleli Press in Ponape in the Federated States of Micronesia. I'd been doing a project up there with some local counterparts, looking at how islands along the main reef around the edge of Ponape, islands particularly in this area here, have been disappearing. And almost certainly they've been disappearing because the sea level is rising. And so it's a very future-orientated project, so the island of Layap that you see there in the photograph, that's probably all gone by now. So here is a very visible, visible result of climate change, in a part of the world where they've heard about climate change, but they haven't localized it. And I think most climate scientists today would agree that localizing climate change it inspires action. If you just talk about it in generic terms, it doesn't inspire action. So look, this reported the results of local research. It named local places and local people. We talked about who told us things about disappearing islands, but it ended up on a note of hope rather than doom. And I think when you're writing about climate change, it's very easy to be very, very pessimistic. So yes, look, a lot of feedback there. This is an online as well as a print media. So I was very, very, very pleased with that. I had an article also a couple of years ago in National Geographic Traveler. And this was all about Fiji's vanishing islands. And I see there's a few people from Fiji online. They probably don't know there's any vanishing islands in Fiji. I'm not going to be able to read this because the screen is being obscured. But my idea was just to sort of mention that the readership is non-specialist, but educated people who are excited to travel. So, when you write something like this, really, I'm trying to get rid of this bar at the bottom here. So that's who you write for. So, in paragraph 1, hook the reader. I can't read it. Okay. Well, inside the reef, there are few waves. When the sun shines, the ocean landscape seems boundless and unruffled turquoise, both an open highway and a full larder. I once called it a geisha landscape, one so emblematic, so evocative of a place that an unwitting observer might easily be tricked into thinking its outward appearance hid nothing of note, but that's untrue. So something like that, hook the reader. I've got colleagues who look at that and say, you've not working again. Sorry, Brittany. You've gone across to the dark side. You've sold out, but of course you haven't, because you balance this kind of commentary with the scientific papers that give you okay, thank you, that give you credibility as an academic. And then in paragraph 2, you whet people's appetite for what is to come. Fiji is a land of contrast. The noise and the smoke in the crowded cities lie at the opposite end of the spectrum to the effortless tranquility of Fiji's smaller islands, with their deserted beaches, unpolluted reefs, and grassy hills. But stay long enough, and you will learn that this too is illusory. The hills have eyes, the people have knowledge and understandings. They hesitate to share with you for fear you'll judge them preposterous. So, I didn't just learn this overnight, but I did learn that there are ways to pull readers in to read your article. There are ways to whet their appetite, and there are ways, like Claire, I think, said so wonderfully, to actually, give them the information that they need. And I thought Lyndall's pyramid turned upside down was also really, really instructive. So look, great feedback there. My third example is from the Washington Post. Yes, they asked me to write an article based on some research that I'd done. I thought, great, How do I hook people in? What do mermaids have to tell us about climate change? And you might think, great, okay. But it was well edited, it was supported by solid research, and then completely trivialized by, you know, a lead photograph of people sitting on the side of a swimming pool with mermaid tails. And of course, if I looked at something like that, I would think, well, who is this lunatic, you know, who's writing about such things, you know? It just, I wasn't consulted about the picture, of course, but of course, on Twitter especially, there was a lot of ridicule from people who don't seem to have read the article, but, you know, like I would perhaps have done, just sort of saw the title and the photograph. But the lesson is, look, you can't control everything, so don't be precious about it. So what have I learned about the media? This, I think, is my last slide. We've heard from Lyndall and Claire about some of these things, but all media outlets need to have readers pay them for content. So they want material that will attract readers, that are aligned with their interests, but also their biases. They want relevant content. You know, you don't write something about Scotland for the climate, for the Sunshine Coast Daily, and you don't write something for the Edinburgh Daily about Sunshine Coast. In the Pacific Islands, I think they also want material that shows understanding and cultural humility. I'm very fond of this term, cultural humility, and I think it's a shame that Georgie Rovulo, who talked about it to the university's ITRC last week, I think it was, or the week before, you know, didn't get, you know, the big turnout that, you know, at least from Pacific researchers at USC, that I would have hoped. But he was talking about the importance of cultural humility. We've moved on in the Pacific from the way things were 50 years ago. We are no longer, you know, in the Pacific sort of soaking up the wisdom of outsiders. We are much more interested to learn about their empathy, their humility. We're much more interested to learn not about why our resilience needs to be built up in the Pacific, but what resilience we have and how we can use that resilience to move forward. So should you bother with the media? Look, I think all university researchers must bother with the media. Look, like Claire said, it's time consuming. You've got to make yourself available. You've got to prepare material that's not necessarily going to get you a promotion or get you a grant. Although I take the point that if you get it out there, sometimes it does attract the right people. But we are paid from the public purse. Your taxes go to pay my salaries. So I feel a strong obligation to explain to you what it is I do with that money. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Professor Patrick. That was very insightful. Thanks for those real life examples of engaging with the media. To keep moving along, we'd like to open up to questions. Is there any questions that anyone would like to pose to any of our three presenters for today? I'll also check the chat online if anyone wants to pop a message in there. Thanks for turning your camera back on, Linda. Awesome. Awesome. I will just hand you this. Thanks.
This might be a question more directed to Claire. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to know if USC was more inclined to work with staff than with students. Students, HGRs in your third year of PhD or something like that.
Certainly, and my colleague Julie is here, so she might also have something to say this, but we work with students. We work with HDR students and academics. So if it's a good story to tell, we'll tell it. So like we do student profiles. If there's a student doing really interesting research, we will do those stories as well. So no, definitely, it's across the board because, you know, student recruitment is a key element of what we're doing, and we want to show people, you know, what a wonderful experience people have when they come to UniSC.
Also get the support of your supervisor before approaching us. That'd be great.
So that's important. So anything you do obviously has to have approval with your supervisor, and often we'll bring them into the media release. And if there's interviews involved, we will get the supervisor to be there and possibly do them, depending on what the story is as well.
thanks. Do we have any other questions? Got one in the chat. Would you like to read it? Oh, we have a question in the chat from Katie McIntyre. She says, given lots of options for media engagement, what would be your recommendation as a first step for an early researcher in this space? Katie, did you want to direct that question to the marketing and communications team potentially? Or yeah, just from the Australian Centre for Pacific Islands Research, we do actually offer a little bit of comms and media support as well if you are putting together that post or update, or you're reaching out to the marketing and communications team. If you'd like a extra set of eyes or a couple of maybe ideas to get started, please reach out and we'll be happy to help you through.
Yeah, and again, I think I covered it. Really, it depends on what your story is. So we should probably be your first port of call in support with your with the team from the centre to see what the story is, and then we can determine what the best approach is to get the best outcome. Does that cover it?
If you want my 2 cents, I agree. I think it's really good to start with your university or research organization comms team, because they can kind of advise you of where the best audience is. But, you know, if you're scared to kind of talk to the media for the first time, a really good one to do initially, I think, is the local radio, because it doesn't sort of live in perpetuity forever. So if you say something you think, oh, I could have said that much better, local radio often doesn't appear online particularly for very long, and so it's a good way. It's very conversational. It's a great way to kind of hone your message as well. So I always sort of recommending starting with a radio interview, because it is a real chat. So it kind of forces you to speak in everyday language.
Yeah, awesome. I also like a little of A/B testing on social media. So if you had a research project and maybe putting forward a couple of different angles on there and seeing what sort of initiates conversation or engagement, can be a nice little way to build your confidence when you're just starting out as well. So do we have any other questions? Or with that, we'll thank our 3 incredible presenters today. Thank you everybody for joining us. And yeah, what a wonderful masterclass. Very proud for today's session. So thank you for joining us.